Hello and welcome to Why Medics Matter, a podcast for doctors by doctors, brought to you by Doctors Training. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Amy Burbridge.
And I'm Dr. Simon Fraser.
So Simon, today we are joined by someone who you know very well. So I will leave the introductions to you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to welcome an inspirational lady, a good friend, a fellow mother of twins and an older daughter, Jo Szram. Jo, I want to let you introduce yourself because you've got, we worked together at MedEd Leaders when you were chair, and it was a real privilege working with you. And I know, I think I've lost count of how many hats you've wore over the years. So how many hats are you wearing at the minute?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I am a hat stand, career hat stand. Maybe that'll be the title of my book. So currently I am a consultant respiratory physician. I work at the Royal Brompton in London, and I'm a what probably would be called a super specialist. So I look after people with occupational lung disease. Quick plug for us there, lungs at work. And I also am the postgraduate dean in Kent, Surrey and Sussex, which is part of the South East region of NHS England. But I do other things. For example, I'm the appraisal lead at my trust. And as a dean, I also have particular portfolios around recruitment and physician training and some other bits and bobs.
Brilliant. So I'd like to talk a bit about leadership in medical education. I know it's something quite close to your heart and very passionate about, and it's an unsettled time at the minute. Why do you think leadership in medical education is important? Just tell me what your views, please.
Well, I think any discipline needs leadership. I think that's a given. So why would medical education be any different? I think that leadership in anything clinical has always been important. So there's always been an understanding that any kind of healthcare profession needs leadership within it to set strategic direction and monitor what goes on operationally and make sure that we hold ourselves and each other and other people working in a health service to account. So that's true of all clinical leaders. That's kind of fairly obvious, I would have thought, to most people listening. I think education is another arm of that. It's just another discipline. It's a really important one because it's a very all-encompassing one, a bit like leadership. So people say, what is leadership? And leadership is everything. And people say that about education and training as well. So what's really interesting to me about leadership in education is you're crossing two really broad streams. So it can look really different depending on which leadership or education role you have. So it almost turns into a Rubik's Cube. So you could be an educational leader by being a supervisor or a representative of a group of resident doctors or a postgraduate dean. And all of those are educational leaders.
I really love that concept of being an education leader from being a supervisor up to dean, because everybody thinks it's only people in by title. And when I'm interacting with foundation program directors and stuff, they see themselves as people who are responsible for the trainees. But they don't necessarily always see themselves being responsible for the education department, for influencing the trainers. How do we change that narrative and get people to see themselves as education leaders?
It's really tough. As a dean, I'm all too aware of that. There's a level around program director where people either embrace the role in its leadership or, as you say, quite rightly say, okay, I look after trainees, but I don't need to think about the direction of travel of the program or where the posts might be or how I might want to change things or innovate or, all the other leadership behaviours that we think about. And it's quite hard to understand how to reach those people as a group. I think individually you can have that conversation. So some of the program directors will say, can I talk to you about my career plans as an educator? So they're clearly thinking about it. That's easy, isn't it? Because they're in that sort of space of thought that this is I've understood the value of this role in a wider sense. But the other program directors who don't think in that way, that's tricky. You end up sort of being slightly thinking about transactional work with that group. And I can't, as a single dean, I simply can't meet all of my program directors one-to-one. So I rely hugely on my network. I'm a big fan of distributed leadership anyway. I think I do a pretty good job. I hope my team would agree at giving people permission to do things such as advocate for leadership roles, encourage their colleagues, encourage their peers. I have a really good group of associate deans, the heads of school. They, I hope, feel empowered from my perspective. But I certainly noticed, having taken this role on, I think I've been in it, it's going to be 3 years this next month or month after. It took a while because that wasn't the way it was. I inherited a proper pyramid where everybody looked to me constantly. So there's a decision to make, the dean. And I don't like working like that. I really like the community of practice approach of leadership. It's an educational model, but you can extend it into leadership quite easily. And the kind of wisdom of the crowd idea. People do struggle with it though. And then we have, I think the other thing about educational leadership is people aren't quite sure who's in charge of education. And that exercises people. So is it the deanery? Is it the college? Is it my trust who employ me? Is it someone else? And because of that, people aren't sure if they're allowed to do something. There's a lot of asking for permission that goes on. And then you end up not changing anything, not innovating, not responding in an agile way to a very fast-paced world now, isn't it? The NHS is changing all the time. You're asked to respond to things in very quick time. And we're pretty good at that clinically. I think, we can go all the way back to the pandemic, but actually we were doing it well before that and have been doing it very well since. But in education, we get a little stuck, don't we? Curricula are a good example, aren't they? So they are set and written down to be explicit so that people know exactly what they need to do to get to a certain point, and how you should do it as well. And this, the obsession with time-based training, and then a complete change to capability-based, but actually maybe time isn't a bad way of measuring experience, and the kind of 10,000 hours principle of expertise, and probably somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of that, I think, in education. We swing around, and the middle's probably the healthy place, but we're not great at staying in the middle.
When I was DMA, I think I used to be really keen to appoint college tutors and stuff, and education roles at the trust. And the thing you talked about, the 3 different bodies, really resonate. You said, well, actually, you're there for the trainees and will represent the trust, but you're also there to interact with the deanery, NHSE, but you also represent the college standards. So how are you going to keep all 3 of us happy in that sense? Have you had can you give us some good examples where that's worked really well?
Well, let me think. I suppose in one of my past hats, as you know, I was Lineker Fellow at the Royal College of Physicians. So that was the officer who had oversight of the college tutors. So I looked after 250 college tutors and their associate college tutors as well. But also was still working as a deputy dean. So I was already, in fact, and then I was also at the trust, I suppose. I wasn't in my education role by then. So I think having that 3-angle view on something is quite interesting. I think, like many things during the pandemic, when we were responding to things, I think everybody came together, as in the hierarchy came together, understanding that it was a really stressful time and we had to look after people well. And that meant we couldn't be arguing because we had to agree, for example, how to derogate the curriculum, how to manage recruitment at a time that we couldn't interview people. So we had to come together and make quick decisions. And that brought collaboration. Again, there are lots of parallels to clinical practice at that time. But obviously what happens is after the storm, in the calm, you then get diversion of thought again. And we're in that kind of area at the moment. I think the other thing to be aware of within educational leadership in the UK is that we have 4 distinct nations, and they don't always agree about the delivery of even a curriculum. They agree with it as a piece of content, but how it's done, quite rightly, will be different. And as a resident doctor in that situation, it's very easy to see the differences. As you said about having twin kids, Simon, children will find the differences between your approach to them as different individuals. And that doesn't mean you're necessarily being unfair, but you may be doing something different for your different children. And you can sort of stretch that analogy into training in big cohorts of doctors within, say, a respiratory program across the country. You will have a different experience, and that's about geographical variation and how you can deliver something. But as long as the outcome is the same, does that matter? Question. If it does matter, why does it matter? What's the perception and what's the reality? I think we deal a lot with issues of perception in education as well. And I think we don't do well at just facing those head on and explaining why things are different and why it won't matter. I think the other really key leadership skill in education is being able to give people reassurance that it will work out correctly. So obviously as a dean, I have, thousands literally of trainees who are going through a linear pathway, more or less, with some hills and dips. They're going along a track, and sometimes they worry that it's all going to go wrong because this X happened. But you will both know at the other end of that is the fact that you get to your consultant job and you realize it didn't really matter how you got there, but you did get there. And there's a whole nother hill to climb as you become a new consultant. So I think some of that leadership as program directors is very important, because you're very close to your doctors in the training programs in a program. It's a bit like being somebody's tutor at a school compared to me, I'm not even a head teacher now. I'm like an academy lead. So I haven't quite got to the point of being Ofsted yet, but you're really far away from those everyday concerns of people who are in education. And it's lovely whenever I get the opportunity to talk to people about their actual concerns, either as individuals or as groups. It's really interesting to talk to them about that perception, because recruitment's another big challenge, isn't it? There aren't enough training posts for everybody, or at least there aren't sufficient training posts for people in the programs that they wish to be in. We still need pathologists, people. But, if that isn't why you went into medicine, it's quite tricky, isn't it? The collective benefit of having the right doctors in the right place in the right programs versus your individual desire, who you sweated to get into medicine and you're really working hard. How do you square the two? It's quite hard, isn't it? So, yeah, training program directors are really important in that, because they could address that quite well.
So you talked about, I think that's really important. There's a lot of worry, isn't there, about whether we get the right program in the right area. People listen to us now and might be in those shoes. What would you say?
I think the first thing I'd say is I've got your back. So I will always advocate. That's why I do this job. That's why I've done every one of my jobs. I'm not, someone called me the dean as an identity today at a meeting. I'm like, I'm not the dean, I'm Jo. I am currently the dean, but one day I won't be the dean anymore. I'll still care, and I'll still do my best to make sure education and training in medicine is the best it can be. So that's that whole the who and the what of roles in leadership. So I probably won't say all of that because I'll get bored. Then I will say, why do you remember why you went into medicine, and do you have the same feeling and thought about it now? Because we change as we get older, so that's important. I went into medicine because my mum told me it'd be a good idea. So I didn't say that in my interviews, by the way. Well, that's the truth of it. It's the truth. She said this would be a good profession for you, and she's obviously wasn't wrong.
Good judge. It seems to have worked out okay.
Yeah. but I was going to cure cancer or something when I was 18, I think, something like that, really noble. And then I probably thought about 5 or 6 different types of career during my time in medical school and during training, I think, and sort of in seriousness, I knew which ones I didn't even think about. So sometimes you might be really set on something, but that may not be what you end up doing. And in any case, you become a consultant, you start with a particular job. Within a few years, you might have what your job looks like every day looks completely different, and medicine's going to change in your career. There's that old adage, isn't there, that what you do when you retire looks nothing like what you did when you first appointed as a consultant. So I think making sure that we're trying to provide certainty and security and psychological safety to people, but within a paradigm that there is constant change, volatility, uncertainty. There will be adversity, and trying to manage both of those things. It's honestly why I get out of bed to do this job, because it's just a lot. It's very interesting. It's very creative. And you really do feel like you add value to people, even if they don't know. Because nowadays, it's rare that a resident doctor will come up to me and say, "Thank you so much for the thing you did X," as opposed to a supervisor, program director. You get a lot of that, but I don't require them to do that. I don't need that as a driver. So I hope that people thinking or listening to this will think, okay, yeah, I hadn't thought about my job like that, but I can see that might work for me, because it's pretty similar to why people become doctors.
Just want to take it to trainees. So as a jobbing physician, educational supervisor, I deal with lots of trainees, and I find that their voice isn't loud enough in the medical education sphere. And maybe they feel like they aren't listened to enough, and they don't have a big enough voice. Is this something that is a consequence of the situation, the pandemic, and what's happened? Or is it something that, we can help them with and try and get them back on board in their training programs?
Oh, that's a good question. There's 2 sides to that. So the first one is, do they understand how much we do take their voice into account? So I always ask people, what do you think happens after you filled in the GMC survey? And that is not, we don't unpack that very much with them. So, and that's probably our bad. We should do a bit more. You said we did. I don't know that the trainee voice has ever been loud. It's probably louder now because social media amplifies it, and actually social media is a platform for raising awareness and crowd awareness as well. It is listened to nationally, etc. Can it ever be loud enough? Don't know. If we spent all our time responding, that would be quite hard as well, because we wouldn't get other things done. We also, again, thinking back to that Venn diagram idea of the patient care and the individual aspiration, it's quite tricky. I had to make difficult decisions about that quite a lot. And sometimes some of the things that are asked for aren't actually possible for various reasons. And I can explain that to the person that asks, but can I explain that to every single doctor who has ever considered that question is really tricky as well. So we don't have very good, I think, kind of communication channels. And that's partly a restriction from, political, statutory body, legal, and then the interplay between college, provider, education body, and they all have their different takes on something. So I think trainee voice is difficult, because you could do it like a town hall and people come and say, I don't want this job because X, or you can use the survey data, and we do get lots of survey data from the NTS. We use it. I have literally 3 people full time, constantly thinking about what the NTS shows us and what we're going to do, and then going and meeting with those doctors. But But the reality is actually the other thing to think about, Amy, is that unless there's a big problem, you probably just get on with it. And doctors are real getting on with it people. So if you actually listen to if you take a cohort of 100 people, there'll be some really active on social media, fantastic advocates, etc. There'll be a group who are advocating for themselves. And then there'll be a very large silent majority, which is true of every, group of people. How do we capture the actual needs of the silent majority? Very, very hard. And I've not cracked it. So a continuing bit of work. We're doing lots of work on it at the moment. And as you'll know, obviously this is going to date this podcast now, but there's a medical training review going on at the moment, which is looking at that. Because we've not had a big reform in education since Shape of Training, 2013, 2014, whenever it was. And that's a long time. Actually, think about how much healthcare has changed in that time, how much society's changed in that time. It's long overdue. So I'm really intrigued to see what that looks like when it's published and what we end up having to do, because we're going to have to do lots of things on the back of it. So,
Jo, I appreciate that we're talking about this at this time now, but I'd be really interested to hear where that listening exercise is at the minute and how it's going to be constructed. Because I know about it, you know about it, other people in senior education roles, but I suspect people Amy's interacting probably don't know it's happening, because you've got the very vocal small percentage of doctors who are representing the voice, but they're the silent majority. Are you okay to share a bit more about that process?
Well, I'd love to, except I'm not involved. I can only tell you as someone who...
You're not involved?
No, because it's being run centrally through a national team, and it's being led by Sir Chris Whitty, Sir Steve Powis together, and with the Academy and a team within NHS England. So when I say I'm not involved, as in I'm not involved in the
you're a stakeholder, but you're not leading it.
Yeah. And so there are two parallel processes running at the same time. So there's the listening exercise, which is literally, what do you think about these things? And then there's the call for evidence, which is, what evidence can you show us that doing X, Y, Z is actually, going to help or hinder or what, etc. So that's quite interesting, I think. It's also going to be very quick, but they've already had a huge volume of responses within a few weeks. So there's no shortage of data in there. So, they're going to have a real challenge of trying to think about those data in a meaningful way for change. And as I say, I'm really happy that we're doing it. It's good that we're doing it, but we mustn't lose. People are going to take time and put effort into responding. So we need to make sure that it's not an exercise of, oh, thanks very much, and we'll do it again in 10 years, but we're not going to change anything. I think the other thing is there's a sort of misnomer that nothing changes. So I said we haven't had a big review for 10 years, which is true. But in the fields that I've worked in, things have changed hugely over that 10-year period. But they're small changes. So we can talk about incremental changes and marginal gains, which are ongoing all the time. I spend literally every day thinking about my marginal gains and what I can do differently within all of that. So, and they're hard to notice, marginal gains, until you look back and think, okay, compared to now, 10 years ago, it was completely different. And that's a good thing, because you don't want, believe me, having a big change is not fun. Because as we know, NHS England is not going to be existing as it is now, and that's going to be a big change. It's very unsettling. It doesn't create a culture of psychological safety in your team, and it really compromises your ability to work at your best. So I'm really pleased that this review is going to then look at things that we will end up implementing, and it's not going to happen in a week. It's got to be less sudden than that. And, people welcome that. They want time to digest things. Whenever a change is very quick, it's very, very tricky to deal with for the majority of people.
You've had many leadership roles. You've led within the organisation, within the college. You lead in regionally. You've done some of the national work with med-ed leaders. I could probably only ask you your personal opinion on this, because we're in this sort of listening exercises. But as we're going through some potential big structural changes and potential changes, what bits should we not lose? What bits are good that we shouldn't throw away from your perspective?
Oh, my goodness. the collaborative spirit of educators. If you talk to most educators, they love it. It's a massive passion. Their eyes light up about whatever it is. It won't be everything. There are people who love simulation and they will talk about it all day, every day, forever. I think it's all right. I can see its value. I can't talk about it for that long. Unless it's low fidelity. I do love a bit of low fidelity simulation. I'm not really into the gadgets, let's face it. But, the gadget people are really important. Look at robotic surgery. If the gadget people hadn't been enthused about that, we wouldn't be training people to use robots. And that's great. So that's another thing I love about it is that you've got people who are passionate about their bit. And it is like leadership, it's such a broad church. You can get at it in any way. And I suppose research is the other thing that's very similar to that. So you can think about research at high level, but that could mean a molecule or a gene, or that could mean a massive global population, everything in between. And education's a bit like that, I think. You just find the thing that you really like and you do a lot of it. Or you perhaps... the reason I've had lots of roles, Simon, is that I like change of roles. I like to think about things from a different perspective all the time. And that keeps my creativity fresh and my ability and desire to innovate and change things fresh. And that, I'm not a big fan of people who sit in education roles and don't change anything. I'm all about safe pair of hands. I'm not saying throw everything out, but I think you really should be thinking about what your vision is for the future and whether you can get there and how and what's going to help you. Otherwise, it's a little difficult, and the people around you tend to get frustrated. So, I just think it's got infinite capacity for creativity, group work, joy, and that interaction with your learners. It's like a patient healthcare professional interaction, isn't it? It's not long gone are the lectures just transmitted to people, and you've got to think about the response of the person back and what you and obviously as any kind of educator learns from the education they give as well, which was the other reason I love it, is that it keeps me knowledgeable about stuff.
I train and facilitate for my own learning.
Yeah,
absolutely. So that's me solid. Amy, you and I were chatting about this the other day about developing your own education careers and medical education career. I think you wanted to ask Jo a couple of questions about this today.
I guess I was intrigued. I actually love educating, like shop floor, bedside teaching, incredibly passionate about taking anybody who wants to learn about anything, clubbing, clinical reasoning, anything, whatever it is. I get so excited. And even talking about it, I'm enthused. I've struggled to take that passion into medical education leadership. And I think that's because I've been pigeonholed as an educator. Amy's a good teacher, but not a good leader. And that's been really interesting. I haven't got jobs in the past because of that perception that I'm a good bedside teacher, but put her in a leadership role, no. And it's how to try and transition between those two. And is it possible? And can good educators make good leaders? I guess there's a lot in there.
That's so interesting, Amy. Yeah. And I would turn this into a career coaching conversation because I'd say, what feedback do you get about you not being a good? I don't even know what not being a good leader really means. And that's a bit personal, Amy. Yeah. So maybe not the way to go. But I mean, it's about.
I'm happy to share a story when I went for an interview, which was a lead of a section at a medical school. Sure. And I'd been teaching on this for a long time.
Yeah.
And I thought I gave a good interview. And at the end I was said, you can teach, but you can't lead. And I was like, okay, so what do you mean by that? And there was very little feedback from that. And that's completely put me off.
Yeah.
In a short interview, they've worked out whether you could lead or not.
They maybe just didn't want me for the job, potentially. And that was the reason. But it was just really interesting. And I was like, can good educators therefore be good leaders?
Yes.
Or is a good educator a leader anyway?
Yeah, and all doctors are leaders. And
exactly.
Actually all humans are leaders, as I say to my children. You don't have to wait for the badge, do you? You just go, right, we're doing this. Do we agree? What do you think? Da 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 da. I always joke about my family. We're never out of the door on time because everyone wants to be in charge. That's true. We have to have a debate about everything, So because I've got 5 leaders, there's no followers in my family, which is a bit of a problem. So Amy, that's such a shame that you got that kind of completely unformed feedback, more to the point. There's so much in that. So yes, absolutely, educators can be leaders. All doctors could be leaders. They have to choose to be, and they have to use the behaviours that make you a leader. And you have to do. I think to be a good leader, more importantly, is about your value set and why are you being a leader. We all know there's people who just do it because it's something else to put on their CV. Just like, literally, please don't do that. It's not helpful. Choose the thing you really care about. It's such an odd way of looking at it. I also don't think all educators should have to take on a leadership or more managerial role. Actually, when you look at program directors, a lot of their work is managerial, and we talk about the coin, of leadership and management. They are a bit distinct. You can be a leader without being a manager in education, because you can say, I'm going to lead a training session or a course, or you can manage without leading anyone, because you can sit there and manage a load of stuff without talking to people. But yeah.
And I do wonder whether that's sometimes even like sort of like basic difference between leadership and management. I think that's sometimes where the difference is that, I can't manage anything. My organizational skills are terrible, but I can probably lead. And I think that sometimes is that misconception that they're the same thing.
Yeah. But I bet you can manage stuff, Amy. It's just that
maybe
you don't want to, because it takes your mental load and you don't enjoy it. That's it's about preference as much as anything, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So if we were to go back to Amy's scenario, she's an excellent educator. She gets a lot of fulfillment, and she wants to make medical education a longer term career, maybe follow not necessarily your path and stuff. How do you progress? What are the opportunities? How do you navigate it? How do we support it? Because it's a bit luck at the minute, isn't it? If you're in the right place at the right time, did you face fit? What's your thoughts, Jo?
Always luck. Also, I got to be where I am partly by mistake. I never thought I'm going to be a dean one day. I didn't wake up one day and go, I want to be a dean. I don't think anyone does that. So, whereas I did think I want to be a doctor. So that's a thing, isn't it? But I didn't think, I must be a dean one day. That's really important to me. I think that you need to explore the multiplicity of roles. So I talked about the disadvantages of 3 ways of looking at education, but that's an advantageous thing as well. And that's why I ended up with so many hats, is I went all over the place in my leadership. So I've done all the hats, which is crazy. But I've learned so much from all the different perspectives, but I only did that by saying yes to them, and occasionally burning out from having too many hats and too many things going on. So there's the whole say yes to stuff, but then you also have to know when to stop doing things. And I remember talking to Simon about how long I would be chairing MedEd leaders and what I wanted to achieve in that time, because I wasn't going to do it forever. But if I got these things over the line, I would feel satisfied that I'd done something that I felt was the right thing to do, and it would progress the organisation. And that was the point of being there. And I remember being very clear with you about that, Simon. And it was probably the first time I'd done that with a role of, right, I've done this, so this is a good time. Bye-bye.
To hand it on.
Yeah. Yeah. And not do it with any reluctance. You see these people who everyone's like, when are they going to stand down? And I really hope I never do that people think that, because I hope it's good to make a good exit, isn't it? That's, and I hand things over in a way that is healthy for the system you're leaving. So I'm not really answering the question, am I? I think you need to look at opportunities and take really good advice from people and ask people for their opinion. So for this role as a dean, I spoke to so many people before I applied and then before I had my interview. And I understood so much about what people expected of the person in that role. We could answer any question about it because it was, it was slightly grueling, I'll admit, but that gave me such a good perspective that when I was in the interview, it was an absolute breeze when they asked me questions. I've got at least 5 things to say about that because I've talked to so many people about it, and I've then thought about it and put it together in my own mental model for it to make sense. So I think taking roles by asking people about them as well as looking out for them, and never out of hand exclude yourself from a role. I think that's a really big mistake. And you won't get everything. I haven't got every job that I got, and I've certainly cried over jobs I didn't get and been very disappointed and really angry for about half an hour because I'm not very good at being angry for very long. A curry and a beer always helps. But those unsuccessful, there's a thing about learning to fail well, isn't there? And I think I failed well when I failed, and it taught me something that made me a better candidate in the future and helped me. But yeah, still awful at the time. Don't like not winning. Sorry.
So I was going to reflect on some of the stuff you said there, which is there are a lot of opportunities. The fact that you can do something in your own trust around education, would be postgraduate, undergraduate. You could go work for colleges, different organizations, stuff like MedEd leaders. And then you've got what was the Dean Ream or whatever it will be. There will be some form of organization regionally. And the bit you picked on, and I've been there myself, is these roles are quite addictive and having lots of hats. And it could be, and that's the thing with sometimes with high performing people. If you want a job done, you give it to a busy person, to the point that they just have too many hats, and you had to let go. What would you say to people out there who have got, they're on this committee for this or on that? They're just their ego is probably being massively fueled by, I'm not saying your ego's been fueled, but by all these different responsibilities. How did you get to that position where you can say, I've done my time, it's time to progress, I'm moving on? How did you get to, was that confidence? Was it just maturity?
Gosh. I mean, luckily a lot of things have fixed tenure. That's better.
No, you made a choice. You could have stayed longer.
I could have. But I got to a point where, perceived conflict of roles was actually what did me. And I don't think you do anyone any favors by having to argue with yourself. Which is that's the way I explain conflict to people. Perception of conflict, so actual conflict is when you literally have to write to yourself to tell yourself off about something. That's ridiculous. But also that perception that, oh, well, she would say that because she also does blah, blah, blah. And when you can even, it's useful to have a helpful internal monologue around that. And then have really good friends to say to, work friends to say to people, do you think that people are going to think I'm too conflicted in this? And that advice is always really welcome. So yeah, I think I've avoided it. And obviously I'm definitely okay now because I have a job that has portfolios within it, so they don't conflict because they're supposed to be together. So that's a lot easier. It was tricky when I was doing a college role, a national, what was then a HE role, and then also looking after MedEd leaders, but it was possible. And that was because the areas I was working in were not overlapping. The value set was the same, which was helpful. So I didn't have to, sometimes you have those roles where you have to be bad cop and then you turn around another group and you're good cop. And that's like, I can't do that because it's too difficult for me. I find that really tricky. Obviously not born for drama. But yeah, self-reflection, good advice from other people. And just, I did learn from that exit that it's good to think, okay, I'm in this job for this reason, and then when this happens I'm going to stop, even if you're only telling yourself. No,
and we did have that chat. That chat. You said, I'm doing this then, this is what I'm going to, but actually working for you at the time, which was just amazing, was
it was a lot of fun.
We wanted to rebrand and get the website and make these name changes to be more inclusive, and that was like, allows us to be really focused. And it's like, okay, now we pass on to Stephen, who's
Doing
leading
a
the
brilliant
leadership and the
job.
other bits.
Yeah.
Absolutely awesome is Stephen.
Yeah. And I
I'm-
hope that he thinks that I gave him a good launch pad to then get on with some of the stuff he wanted to do. And that's the best thing you can do as a leader, is not leave the next person with a load of stuff that isn't quite finished. And, oh no, I wouldn't have done it that way if I had started it. So I think I'm not a brilliant completer finisher, Amy. It's not I have to surround
Nor me.
myself with other, but Simon is.
Exactly.
So between us, we got stuff over the line, and that I think is important. Knowing your own, I wouldn't say weaknesses, it's just not the bit that feeds me. So I'm not very good at, getting that done.
Talk about energizers. Yeah. You get energized by big creative, seeing the big picture. Yeah. And I love executing. Yeah. So we play to our strengths. Absolutely. And I think sometimes we expect everybody leader to have every single strength. To say, well, you can't, you're not a good diary micromanager organizer, doesn't mean you're not, you can buy that in really easily. You can even use AI to do that for you now, which is, that's another conversation. So we figure everybody has to be perfect. And what I would say to people listening is, I see a lot of people in their career and they had a lot of imposter thoughts. I hate the word imposter syndrome, because if she's like you suffer, it's like, if you don't have healthy imposter thoughts, which is maybe I'm not good enough, you're probably doing it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. I would say it's a physiological state. It's not pathology. It's normal to feel like, why am I here? Just like it's normal to think I really need to eat because I'm hungry. You don't beat yourself up about needing to eat. So why would you, But it's interesting to reflect on when you feel imposter syndrome. Like, why am I feeling like that? What's making me feel like that? Is it about me, or is it the environment I've been put into? That then forms the basis of now that I've got to the role I'm in, I try and maintain a really inclusive environment, but I'm very cognizant that that's easy for me to say in my position. And how do I make sure that stays inclusive for everybody else? Because that's the one thing I would say about being a dean, distinct to all the other roles I've had, is people aren't completely honest. Not everyone is completely honest with you once you become a dean, because it's the dean, and that is tricky. People will tell you what they think.
You what think you want to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I really don't like it.
That's why you're Jo, not the dean. I'm
correct.
Jo.
Yeah.
We'll come towards the end, Jo, and I asked this question on every show. If you've been listening to any of the previous episodes, if you could go back and advise your 21-year-old version of yourself, what advice would you give yourself?
21. I was pretty good at 21. I was having a good time. I don't think I'd give my 21-year-old self any advice. I was really happy. I had a great year. I'd smashed my exams. Great social life. I was doing loads of fitness. I'm not sure I'd give myself any advice. Just carry on, kids, I think, at that point. Everyone has their different... Yeah, well, I didn't worry. I wasn't really worrying about stuff because I was on a bit of a roll at that point. Sorry.
I think that resonates with your advice to everybody, as you said earlier on, which is, don't overthink it. You'll get there and it'll be all right.
But I've always thought that, Simon, that's like one of my bits of DNA. I don't know if it's DNA or imprinting, because my dad was like that. He was always like, it's fine. Everything's fine. Which doesn't always apply, but it does get you through the hard times, even if it's not fine. It's like that little dog drinking the tea, with the flames, that little meme. That's me. I'm that dog. Always happy. In a slightly irritating way. Or in the thing in the Monty Python where John Cleese's having his limbs chopped off and he's like, it's fine, I've got another arm. Got another leg. That's me. It's fine. Yeah.
An eternal optimist.
100%.
I think we need that at the moment. We need people to just remind us it's going to be fine.
Yeah, it will. It will be fine. It might be different, but it will be fine. Because people like us care about this stuff. That's why it will be fine. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us today. It was really interesting. I really like I'm an overthinker and I worry about everything. So maybe I need to take something from you and just, what will be, and just
it really
carry on
will.
going. Yeah.
And they do say
Yeah,
that
yeah.
about worrying, that there's a great, I can't quote it, but there's a whole thing about worry being energy that you're using up that you don't need to.
Exactly, that you don't need to. Yeah,
that thing.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And at some point, the right thing will just appear.
Oh my
there.
gosh, absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
And it does. But you do need to make yourself open and make other people know you're open to opportunity, because then they'll think of you. If you come up to people and go, I'm really interested in X, then that will happen. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And inspiration is always that energy's coming through at the end. I want to come back and work with you. I've missed it so much.
Yay, let's do it, man.
Take care. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.